Hello family, welcome to Spellbinding Stories. Please subscribe, hit the like button. It truly means the world to us. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you never miss another powerful story. Thank you so much for your support. Now sit back, relax, and let's dive into tonight's spellbinding tale. The clock had long ticked past midnight. The towering office building stood in silence, emptied of its workers, the floors eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of electricity and the soft, dragging rhythm of a mop being pulled across gleaming tiles. Everyone had gone home. Everyone except Marilyn James. With a tired grunt, she leaned on the mop handle, sweat glistening on her brow. "This place is too big for one person," she murmured under her breath, her voice barely rising above the silence. Her thoughts were tangled, restless. There were bills piling up back home, a cousin's sick child she hadn't checked on, and a landlord already threatening eviction. But the job was her escape. As backbreaking and mind-numbing as it was, it kept her away from the chaos of her life, at least for a few hours. So she kept scrubbing, kept moving, pretending that the shine on the marble floor somehow made her problems smaller. Her last stop for the night was the top floor, the executive suite. She hesitated at the door, staring up at the plaque. Damien Carter, Chief Executive Officer. The name alone made most employees shudder. Ruthless, cold, unapproachable. He was the kind of man who didn't believe in second chances, the type who fired people for typos and mistakes whispered about in break rooms. No one saw him unless summoned. No one dared question his authority. And yet tonight, Marilyn was about to enter his domain. She pushed the door open slowly. The room swallowed her in quiet luxury. Plush carpets muffled her footsteps, and the scent of expensive wood polish mixed with traces of an intoxicating masculine cologne still clinging to the air like dominance. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, the distant lights twinkling like indifferent stars. Marilyn exhaled and dropped her rag onto the sleek mahogany desk. She reached for her small Bluetooth speaker, her secret weapon against the crushing silence. As soft, old-school jazz filled the room, her shoulders dropped just slightly. For a moment, she wasn't just a cleaner. She was a woman with rhythm in her bones, melody in her veins. She didn't plan to move, but the music had other ideas. Her hips began to sway, gently at first. Then came the subtle twirl of her feet, the way her hands floated in the air as if catching invisible dreams. She danced like no one was watching, because in her world, no one ever was. And that's when she let go. The mop was abandoned in a corner. The walls no longer mattered. The bills, the pressure, the broken dreams, they faded. Here, in the heart of power, she became something else, something free. But freedom has a cost. Behind the tinted glass wall that separated the CEO's personal office from the outer floor, a tall figure stood motionless, cloaked in the shadows. Damien Carter hadn't left after all. Tonight, business had worn him down more than usual. A stubborn merger, a backstabbing board member, a world of decisions no one would ever understand. He had stayed back to breathe, to think. But what he saw now robbed him of all thought. She moved like thunder in disguise, quiet but impossible to ignore. There was something hauntingly beautiful in the way her body flowed, untamed yet graceful. He didn't recognize her name, just her presence. It sparked something dangerous in him, a pull, a question, a memory of a man he used to be before money hardened him into myth. His jaw tightened. This wasn't in the rules. Cleaners cleaned, employees obeyed. No one stepped into this space like it belonged to them. And yet, this woman just had, and he couldn't look away. Damien Carter had never been the type to lose focus. Every part of his life was clean-cut, regimented, shaped by order, discipline, and control. Feelings were distractions. Spontaneity was a threat. And vulnerability? That had no place in the world he ruled. But that night, something shifted. He stood silently in the shadow of his doorway, arms crossed against his chest, lips drawn in a line. Yet his eyes betrayed him. They were locked on her, the woman on the floor below, the one who should have been invisible to someone like him. Just another cleaner, another face behind a name he never bothered to learn. And yet, Marilyn James had managed to steal his full attention without even trying. There was no rhythm to the world Damien lived in, no color beyond contracts and expectations. But this woman, she was movement and melody all at once. Her body swayed as if the music had reached into her soul and pulled her into another realm. There was no hesitation in her steps, no shame, just freedom. A raw, untamed beauty that dared to exist where it shouldn't. He watched her, entranced. The CEO, known for his merciless decisions, now frozen in the corridor like a man witnessing something sacred. A smile pulled at the corner of his mouth, unwelcome and unfamiliar. He forced it back. She's just dancing, he told himself, just a tired cleaner blowing off steam. But the tightness in his chest whispered otherwise. She wasn't supposed to matter. She wasn't supposed to stir anything. And yet, something about the way her arms lifted, the graceful spin of her feet, the soft rise and fall of her breath. It felt like poetry, written for no one but him. For the first time in a long time, the world inside his head went quiet. No meetings, no mergers, just her. He should have turned away, should have respected the boundary between them. But he stood there, unmoving, mesmerized by every movement she made. Then, suddenly, she stopped. Her breath came out in a gentle sigh, as if she had exhaled her entire soul. She bent to retrieve her mop, switched off the speaker, and the silence crashed back in. The spell shattered. Damien blinked. Had he been holding his breath? He stepped back quickly into the shadows, retreating before she could glance in his direction. The hallway swallowed him again, but the moment clung to his mind like perfume on skin. He dragged a hand through his hair, lips pressed tightly together. It meant nothing, he told himself again, almost like a prayer. Just a cleaner, just a dance. But deep down, in a place he'd long stopped visiting, he knew the truth. That wasn't the last time he would watch her move. And heaven help him. It wouldn't be the last time he wished she was dancing just for him. The next morning, Damien Carter entered his office not with his usual steel-like calm, but with a flicker of something unspoken lingering behind his eyes. He moved slower, his gaze sweeping the room as if searching for something, or rather someone, before the day could even begin. His steps halted for a heartbeat near the windows, shoulders squared yet stiff, as though bracing for the unexpected. He had barely slept. His thoughts had betrayed him all night, consumed by flashes of a woman he barely knew. Her silhouette had danced behind his eyelids every time he shut them, and now, standing in the one place where control was everything, Damien found himself waiting like a man haunted. His assistant and closest friend, Maxwell, walked in moments later, a tablet in hand and a fast-paced tone already rolling. "So, the pitch with Aegis Corp has been moved to 3:30, he began. "But I think it'll go smoother if we restructure the opening slide. I took the liberty of drafting a few changes. Tell me what you think." Maxwell kept talking, flipping through slides and explaining projections with practiced confidence, unaware that Damien hadn't heard a single word. Not really. For about 4 minutes, he continued, until he finally paused and tilted his head. He frowned. "Damien." The CEO blinked, as if waking from a dream. His fingers were loosely resting on the desk, but his eyes were fixed on the door. Maxwell let out a low chuckle, stepping closer. "Okay, what did I miss?" he asked, voice lighter now. "You've barely blinked. You're usually dissecting every chart I show you. This time I could have told you we were launching a clown agency, and you'd have nodded." Damien's lips twitched. "I'm listening." "No, you're not. Maxwell replied, setting the tablet down and crossing his arms. "I've known you since we were 19. I've seen you obsess over deadlines, mergers, even your wardrobe, but I've never seen you like this. What is it?" Damien leaned back, his jaw tightening. He didn't answer immediately, which only deepened Maxwell's suspicion. He was a vault when it came to personal matters. No cracks, no leaks. That was the rule. Maxwell stood for a moment longer, watching his friend with narrowed eyes. "You're not going to tell me, are you?" Damien didn't flinch. He simply returned his gaze to the tablet, lips tight, jaw clenched. With a resigned sigh, Maxwell picked up the device. "Fine. Keep your secrets. But whatever it is, I hope it's worth the distraction. We'll talk later." He gave one last glance, then left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence returned. Damien tapped his fingers once against the desk, then paused. His shoulders shifted slightly, as though adjusting to a weight pressing invisibly on his chest. The room felt heavier now. Or maybe it was him. He leaned back into the chair, eyes fixated on the door. And then, just as though he'd summoned her from the deepest corner of his thoughts, she walked in. Marilyn James. She moved like she didn't belong, but not in the way most people would notice. There was a quiet dignity in her stride, a calm elegance beneath the uniform and routine. She didn't speak, didn't look at him, just wheeled her cleaning cart inside like it was any other day, any other office, and not the private space of a man whose name sent shivers down boardrooms. Her eyes were focused, deliberate. She began wiping down the nearby cabinets, her hands gliding over the wood in slow, circular motions. The cloth moved smoothly, back and forth, with a grace that shouldn't have been noticeable, but to Damien, it was. Every small movement she made was amplified. It was as though the room responded to her presence, softening, settling. She knelt by the edge of the glass table, her skirt folding neatly beneath her, and Damien's breath caught. Not because of anything she was trying to do. She wasn't trying at all. That's what made it worse, more intoxicating. She was simply existing, working, unaware. And somehow, that made her all the more dangerous. Damien's eyes traced the arch of her back as she reached to the far corner, the gentle roll of her shoulders, the way a few strands of her hair slipped loose and framed her face. He shifted slightly in his seat, suddenly aware of a tension building in his chest. His throat was dry. His palms, the hands that signed billion-dollar deals without a tremor, were now resting against the armrest, clenched tight. What was this? This unfamiliar buzz in his veins, this heat low in his stomach, this pull. She moved to his desk next, carefully wiping around his files, her eyes still respectfully averted. She didn't linger, didn't flirt. She simply did her job with the kind of care and focus that stirred something raw inside him. He could smell her now, light, clean, like soap and lavender and the hint of worn paper. A scent that shouldn't mean anything, but wrapped itself around his senses like a whisper in the dark. Damien Carter, the Damien Carter, sat completely still, watching this woman tidy the edge of his desk, and for the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, off balance, like a man peering through glass at something he wasn't allowed to touch. He swallowed hard, his body reacting in quiet betrayal. His heart had picked up pace, his skin was warmer than before, and there was a flutter low in his chest that felt too human for someone like him. She didn't even know what she was doing to him, and he, damn him, wasn't ready to admit what it meant. But one thing had become painfully, undeniably clear. He wasn't just watching her, he was feeling her, and that terrified him more than anything else in the world. It took everything in Damien's chest to force the words out. For a man who stood before presidents and board members without flinching, it was baffling how difficult it suddenly felt to speak to her, his own employee, in his own office. He cleared his throat, voice low, deliberate, but not as steady as he intended. "What's your name?" The words sliced through the stillness, hanging in the air like a foreign language neither of them expected. Marilyn froze. Her fingers stopped mid-wipe against the polished desk. She straightened slowly, her hand tightening around the cleaning cloth. When she finally turned to face him, her expression held surprise, not fear, but something close to disbelief. As if the last man on earth she expected to acknowledge her had just said her name without knowing it. Her eyes met his, just briefly, dark, unreadable, cautious. "Marilyn," she replied, voice soft but composed. "Marilyn James." Damien gave a small nod, trying to appear unaffected, though his chest tightened with every second of silence. "Do you enjoy working here?" The question nearly caught in his throat. It wasn't what he'd meant to ask. Not really, but it slipped out like a nervous reflex. She blinked. He saw the shift in her posture, the hesitation in her shoulders. She hadn't expected a conversation, certainly not from him. "It's work," she said carefully, her tone respectful but neutral. "I'm here for the paycheck." Her eyes dropped again, as if unwilling to let his gaze hold her for too long. Damien's jaw flexed, her honesty pierced deeper than he anticipated. He gave a slow breath, searching for his footing. "That's not quite an answer." She hesitated, then let out a faint sigh. "It's not my passion, but it helps me survive." Those words hit him like a weight. Survive. Something shifted behind his eyes. A man born into legacy, who'd never known the ache of unpaid rent or skipped meals. He had always wanted, and received, worked for things, yes, but never fought to survive. But now, watching her, he saw it. The exhaustion masked behind diligence, the quiet strength hiding behind lowered eyes, the kind of pain that never screamed, only lingered. He looked at her, really looked, and realized this wasn't just a cleaner. She was someone who had learned to hide everything behind humility. Someone who danced when no one was watching, because that was the only time she felt alive. She turned back to her work, almost instinctively, her face composed but slightly flushed, as if the fact that he'd spoken to her at all left her exposed. Damien let her go. Not out of disinterest, but because he didn't trust himself to say more without sounding like a man unraveling. But the ache in his chest didn't ease. He had never been denied anything. And yet, in that moment, he realized he envied her. She had something he'd never owned. Resilience. Not the kind that fought in boardrooms or conquered empires. Damien had that kind of strength, the resilience of discipline, ambition, and responsibility. The kind that made a man out of pressure and expectations. But hers was different. It was the resilience of someone who had tasted life's bitterness and kept going anyway. The quiet kind. The kind that didn't seek praise, didn't wear a suit, and didn't come with titles. It was a resilience shaped by pain, by endurance, by survival. And somehow, that made her unforgettable. He didn't plan to say it. The words came out before he could weigh them. "I saw you last night." Marilyn froze instantly, her hand gripping the handle of the cleaning cart like it was anchoring her to the floor. Slowly, she turned to face him, her expression carefully controlled. Too controlled. "Pardon?" she asked, though the tightness in her voice betrayed her. Damien leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze fixed on her like he was trying to read something beyond the surface. "You were dancing." A ripple of unease crossed her features. For a fleeting second, it was all there, shock, discomfort, a flash of fear. She lowered her eyes, nervously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I didn't know anyone was around," she muttered, her voice quieter now. The heat rose to her cheeks. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the cleaning cloth, the confidence she usually carried while working suddenly gone. She didn't know how to stand, where to look. It felt like stealing a piece of joy that wasn't hers to take. "I'm sorry," she added quickly, voice shaky. "I'll make sure that's not what I meant." His voice was low, firm, cutting through her apology before she could finish. It wasn't harsh, but it stopped her cold. She looked up, startled, searching his face for anger, or humor, or judgment. But he gave her none of it, just that unreadable stare that made her feel like she was standing under a spotlight. The silence between them thickened. She shifted, the awkwardness of it all pressing down on her like a weight. She wanted to vanish, to escape whatever strange, invisible thread now connected them. Then, without another word, Damien turned back to his screen. His fingers resumed their movement across the keyboard, his focus snapping back to the work in front of him. Conversation over. But Marilyn knew that something in that room had changed. Not just in the air, not just between them, something inside her. And maybe, just maybe, something inside him too. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she was certain this was only the beginning. Marilyn walked down the hallway, clutching the cleaning supplies like they were armor. Her chest felt tight, her eyes stung, but she forced herself to keep moving. Every step echoed in her ears louder than usual, perhaps because her thoughts were so loud, so tangled. She hadn't wanted any of this. Not the conversation, not the stares, certainly not the whispers that had started following her through the building like shadows she couldn't shake. What had she done really? She danced, alone, at night. When the world wasn't watching, it wasn't for anyone. It wasn't a performance. It was the only thing that made her feel human again after scrubbing her way through days that barely left her room to breathe. But now, because Damien Carter, the CEO of all people, had spoken to her, everything had changed. Not for the better. She had barely started wiping down the windows when she heard it, snippets of voices slicing through the air like thin knives. "She was in his office again, I swear. I heard he stayed to watch her dance. Can you imagine? She's just the cleaner, probably trying to climb somehow." The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. They were sharp enough, meant to reach her ears. Marilyn's hands faltered. Her breathing grew uneven, but she didn't look up. She couldn't. Not when her throat was burning from the effort of keeping it all in. She felt their judgment pressing on her skin like heat, and in that moment, she hated being seen. She hated that she'd ever drawn attention to herself, even unknowingly. She had spent years learning how to be invisible, and now that someone had finally noticed her, she was being punished for it. She turned the corner and slipped into a small, empty supply room, shutting the door behind her. She didn't even bother locking it. She just sank to the floor, placed the cleaning bottle beside her, and let her head fall into her hands. The first sob was quiet. The next was not. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks, soaking her palms. She hadn't wanted to cry. She never wanted to cry where someone could find her. But it was too much. The embarrassment, the assumptions, the knowing glances, all because of a single moment of freedom, a moment she thought belonged to herself. What made it worse was the guilt. She wasn't even sure what she was guilty of. She didn't flirt. She didn't linger. She didn't ask for his attention. But somehow, she had become a target. The cleaner who forgot her place. The woman who stepped into a story no one believed she had the right to enter. She had spent years cleaning around people who never saw her. People who walked past like she was part of the furniture. Not someone with dreams, struggles, or a name. And now that someone had seen her, not just seen, but acknowledged her, she wasn't basking in it. She was drowning in the backlash. For the first time in a long while, she had felt visible. But instead of feeling seen, she felt exposed, stripped, like her joy had betrayed her. The cruel part was that Damien's gaze hadn't carried judgment. If anything, it had been curious, almost gentle. But theirs, those co-workers who barely knew her name, looked at her like she'd committed a crime, and somehow that hurt more, because their opinions were loud, they echoed, and they dug into her skin like tiny barbs she couldn't remove. A wild thought crossed her mind, brief but burning. What if she just walked away? What if she left her badge and uniform behind and never came back? It wouldn't be because of the workload. It would be because of this, the invisible weight of being talked about, of being resented for something she didn't ask for. She blinked through tears, the idea settling for just a moment before reality pulled it away. She needed the job. She had bills. She had no choice. But that didn't stop the ache from planting itself deep in her chest. Later that evening, the building was once again drenched in silence, the world outside slipping into its own tired rhythm. But Damien hadn't left. Not really. His car had pulled out of the parking lot hours ago, but he had circled back. Quietly. Deliberately. Something about her had pulled him back like a tide he couldn't resist. He'd told himself he had forgotten something, some important file, but that was a lie he didn't even bother justifying anymore. He lingered in the shadows of the corridor, just out of sight from the main office floor, where she had danced the night before, a place she had unknowingly turned into a sanctuary. He stood still, blending into the dark, waiting without admitting that he was. When Marilyn stepped into the room, he could feel the difference in her. Her posture was slouched with exhaustion, her eyes heavy, her steps slow. The weight of the day clung to her like a second skin. She placed the cleaning supplies down and stood there for a moment, staring into the empty space like she was daring herself to forget, just for a minute, that the world had been cruel to her today. She didn't turn on the music at first. She simply stood still, her hand hovering near the speaker, unsure. Tense. You could almost hear the war in her chest. Do it. Don't do it. You'll get seen. You'll get hurt again. But the day had taken so much from her, and the silence, though safe, felt too heavy to bear. So she tapped play. The melody filled the air gently, like it had been waiting for her. She didn't move immediately. She fought it. He could see it in her arms, tight, still, held against herself like she was holding back a scream. But slowly, her body betrayed her caution. Her fingers twitched, her foot shifted, and then softly she began to sway. It wasn't the confident dance he had seen before. It was slower, sadder, like her soul was trying to stretch without breaking. Her arms moved as if they were releasing everything she couldn't say. She wasn't dancing for joy tonight. She was dancing to survive. And Damien watched from the shadows, something sharp tightening in his chest. He hadn't meant for this. He hadn't meant to make her afraid to be herself. And now, seeing her hesitate, watching her force herself not to feel too much, it stung. She had been free once. Now, because of him, she was afraid of her own rhythm. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward into the light. He didn't say a word, just cleared his throat gently. Marilyn spun around, startled, her breath catching in her throat. Her chest heaved from the sudden rush of movement, eyes widening the moment they landed on Damien. He stood there, quiet, unreadable, as if the moment belonged to neither of them, yet demanded both their attention. "You might want to consider locking the door if privacy is what you're after," he said, his voice lower, softer than usual, almost careful. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Embarrassment flooded her. All she wanted was to vanish, to disappear from that room and from his sight. But instead, she managed a breath and forced her voice out in a quiet, trembling reply. "I didn't think anyone would still be here." Damien tilted his head, his gaze still fixed on her. "Neither did I." And in that fragile pause, something invisible but powerful shifted. The boundary between them, so clearly drawn by status, silence, and circumstance, had just blurred in a way neither of them could ignore. The next morning, Marilyn had made herself a promise. Keep her head down. No eye contact, no small talk. Pretend nothing ever happened. The last thing she needed was more attention. After the whispers, the stares, and the unrelenting weight of yesterday, she wanted nothing more than to disappear into her routine. She moved quickly, her cleaning kit in hand, trying to avoid the morning rush of employees swarming the elevators. But as the doors began to close, she lunged forward instinctively, slipping inside at the last second, only to realize too late that she wasn't alone. She nearly stumbled backward from the sudden closeness, her tray tilting in her grasp. A strong hand reached out, steadying her just in time. The cloths rattled, a bottle nearly tipped, but nothing fell. Her breath caught as she looked up, her eyes locking with a pair of sharp, familiar ones. Damien Carter. For a few seconds, neither of them said a word. His hand remained gently wrapped around her forearm, his touch firm, but not forceful. The elevator hummed quietly around them, enclosing them in a small world of tension and silence. I'm sorry, she breathed out, lowering her gaze, trying to create some kind of distance, even if just emotional. I didn't realize. Neither did I, he replied, voice even and low. But there was no trace of irritation. Instead, something warmer lingered beneath the surface. Curiosity, maybe, or something more fragile. She bent down quickly, trying to adjust the tray in her arms, but Damien crouched down beside her, retrieving one of the bottles that had tipped slightly. You don't have to do that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, uncomfortable with the idea of him helping her. Why not? He asked, lifting a brow. Because... She hesitated, struggling to put words to the boundaries society had already drawn between them. You're the CEO. There was a pause. His lips curved, just faintly. Not a full smile, but enough to disarm her. I wasn't aware that made me incapable of picking up a cloth. The elevator gave a soft ding, stopping on a floor neither of them moved to step out on. They were caught in a strange in-between, of proximity, of silence, of something that neither of them could define. She finally straightened, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you," desperate to escape. As she turned, hand moving toward the control panel, his voice stopped her in place. Marilyn! She froze. He had never said her name before. Not like that. Not gently. Not like it meant something. She turned slowly, heart racing, eyes searching his. Damien studied her, his expression unreadable but his voice undeniably soft when he said, "Don't stop dancing." It hit her harder than she expected. Not just the words, but what they implied. That he had truly seen her. That he remembered. That, for some reason, it mattered to him. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to understand what he saw when he looked at her. But the emotion in her throat swelled too quickly, and instead, she gave him the smallest nod and turned away before her face could betray her. As the doors finally opened and she stepped out, Damien remained behind, his hands slowly curling into fists. He knew he had crossed a line he'd been trying to respect. He shouldn't have said anything, and yet, for reasons he wasn't ready to admit, he didn't regret a word. Marilyn had spent the entire day trying to fold herself into the background again, but it wasn't working. Not this time. The looks lingered longer. The whispers had turned sharper. And every time she passed through a hallway, she could feel it, eyes on her, people pretending not to talk as they did. All because Damien Carter had said her name, had looked at her like she was more than the uniform she wore. But that single moment, soft as it was, had started a storm. That evening, she and Loretta were cleaning the staff lounge. The quiet clinks of bottles and the wet glide of sponges filled the air. Marilyn had hoped they'd get through the task without conversation, but Loretta, never one to hold back what she was thinking, broke the silence. "So," she said casually, scrubbing at a countertop, "you and Mr. CEO..." Anything I should know? Marilyn didn't respond immediately. She focused on the corner of the sink like it held the meaning of life. There's nothing, she said after a beat. Honestly? Loretta chuckled under her breath. Right. Nothing. Except he says your name like it's the only one he remembers, and he's been watching you like you're some kind of office secret. Marilyn's heart sank a little. Not because Loretta was wrong, but because her voice carried something too sharp beneath the sweetness. You're reading into it, she replied quietly, gripping the cloth tighter. It was just one conversation. Loretta leaned her weight against the counter, folding her arms. Look, I'm not saying this to upset you. I just don't want you getting your hopes up. Marilyn glanced at her, unsure. I don't have hopes. I know you, Marilyn, Loretta said, her tone soft but laced with a quiet authority. You're a dreamer, always have been, but I'm telling you, if somewhere in that kind heart of yours, you're thinking Damien Carter is looking at you like a man looks at a woman, just stop. The words landed like ice down Marilyn's back. She blinked, once, slowly. Loretta continued gently, like it was for her own good. People like him, they don't end up with girls like us. You're lovely, don't get me wrong, but you clean floors. He owns the building. Even if he's curious for a second, it doesn't mean anything. Marilyn felt something inside her curl up, like a flame flickering under too much wind. She hadn't asked for any of it. She didn't want to be anyone's project or fantasy or pity story. And yet here she was, being warned not to believe in something she hadn't even dared to hope for. I never wanted his attention, she said softly, eyes focused on her hands. I didn't do anything. Loretta gave her a sympathetic smile. I'm just saying, stay grounded. Life's hard enough without heartbreak you walked into blind. There was no malice in her voice, just calm, calculated truth. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Marilyn gave a small nod and went back to cleaning, but her movements had lost their rhythm. The cloth in her hand no longer felt like a tool. It felt like an excuse to look away, to hide the sting in her eyes. She hadn't asked for the moment in the elevator. She hadn't asked to be noticed. But now that she had been, the reminder that she didn't belong in his world felt heavier than ever. The city lights blinked through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Damien's penthouse, casting a muted glow over the minimalist space. He sat on the edge of his couch, a tumbler of untouched whiskey in his hand, staring blankly at the skyline. Everything about the evening was designed to relax him. Quiet jazz, dim lights, peace. And yet, his mind refused to settle. Across from him, Maxwell, dressed down in a t-shirt and joggers, sipped from his glass with a smirk tugging at his lips. You've been sitting there like a statue for 20 minutes, he said. Don't tell me you're actually thinking about someone. Damien exhaled through his nose, not looking at him. I'm fine. You're lying, Maxwell replied casually, placing his drink on the table. You've built empires without blinking. But the moment a girl with a mop walks by, you lose composure. Tell me I'm wrong. Damien shot him a look, but there was no heat behind it. Just a weight he couldn't name pressing on his chest. She's not just some girl with a mop, he muttered under his breath. Maxwell leaned forward, intrigued. So it is her. I knew it. Marilyn, right? I've seen how you look at her, like you're drowning in thoughts you don't want anyone else to hear. Damien ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched across his face. She's quiet. She doesn't chase attention. And yet, she's everywhere in my head. She doesn't even know what she's doing to me. Maxwell gave a low whistle. That bad, huh? I feel like a finished man, Max, Damien confessed, voice low. Like I've worked my whole life to build walls around me, and now she's tearing them down just by existing. There was a pause. The kind that stretches too long and says too much. You can't even look her in the eye without second-guessing yourself, Maxwell said. That's not nothing. Damien stared at his glass for a moment. His mind spun at the memory of her eyes, the gentle way she moved, how her presence wrapped around him like a quiet fire he couldn't smother. She didn't need to try. That was what made it worse. "I don't even know what to do anymore," he said. Maxwell chuckled softly. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe you're not supposed to do anything until you figure out what she really means to you." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Inside, Damien sat still, haunted by a feeling he could no longer bury.